Sean, so thank you so much for joining us today. Come to this Faith Nuggets Inspired Series episode 2. So why don't you share a few lines about you rather than there is so much I had missed about you, but why don't you share something about you?
Well, thanks, Dekar. It's wonderful to be with you on the Faith Nuggets series, inspiring people around the world. And my prayer is that people will meet with Jesus through this podcast and will be inspired in their faith by Him as we look at Scripture in answer to some of these difficult questions. I have been a follower of Jesus since about the age of 5 when I first heard the gospel and responded in faith to that invitation that Jesus gives us, the invitation of grace. Believer since the age of 5 when I first heard the gospel in an Anglican church where my family took me, and responded by praying and accepting Jesus into my life. And as a teenager, as you grow in teenage years, you keep responding and responding, feeling that you are not good enough and need to keep receiving the gift of God of salvation. And then I had the assurance of salvation through my teenage years and became a pastor, a church pastor, planting churches in Zimbabwe and following Jesus and loving and serving the poor and vulnerable. So planted churches that loved and served and created initiatives that were for the blessing of the poor. Having done that for several years, moved to the UK and became part of an international NGO charitable entity that fights the injustice of human trafficking and loving and serving the poor and vulnerable in that way. So my passion remains for Jesus and serving in His kingdom, for the advance of His kingdom, for the blessing of many and their freedom and joy and peace.
Let us jump into our question round. So we have God so loves the world, and why do so many people, especially children, suffer from problems like hunger, abuse, and neglect? Can a Christians reconcile the presence of suffering and bondage in that loving God?
Well, that's one of the biggest questions that we have in the world. Like, why does a good God, if God is so good, why does He allow so much suffering, particularly for the vulnerable and for children? And most people would come at that question by saying, we don't deserve, or those who don't deserve to suffer. Ultimately, it is true. God is a good God. He's a God of love. He's a loving God. And our default scripture often as Christians to go to is Romans chapter 8:28. And we all know that off by heart, that we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God. So God doesn't make any rubbish. He makes good things. So why all of this suffering? Like, how does a good God allow suffering? Well, actually, we're the ones who are the causes of suffering. Our sin causes suffering, and we need to work out the answer to this question. I'm reminded of the story in John where Jesus, when they walked by a man who was born blind, His disciples asked Him, Rabbi, who sinned? If we're saying that sin is the cause of some of these problems, these disciples are saying, so who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And Jesus' answer was amazing. He says, it was not this man that sinned, nor his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. So sometimes suffering and pain exists so that the works of God might be displayed in us. And He allows suffering. He doesn't cause suffering. We're the causes of suffering. He allows it. And it says in Romans 8:28 that God causes everything to work together for our good. We need to ask the question, how does suffering work for our good if we love God and are called according to His purpose and ultimately for His glory?
I really love the same scriptures that says Romans 8 and 22 that all things work together for good. But most of the time we miss that same point when something bad happens. And when we see something bad in the society, that why this is happening. But second question, so understanding the social problems. So why do issues like poverty, injustice, and inequality still continue and exist despite the Christian teachings that we hear and that we follow? And what is the responsibility of the churches and individual Christians to do effectively to tackle these persistent social problems?
I believe it's because we live in a fallen world and there is still sin around us, and sinful people aim to use other people for their own temporary joy, as it were. And that's the purpose of sin, is to take advantage of another for your own temporary joy, if you're not looking ahead to the eternal joy that we're given. So these problems exist because of sin ultimately, and because there's sin in the world. I believe that's the church's role, Christians' role and response, is to show how God truly exists in this world by being God's agents of the kingdom of heaven on earth, God's hands and feet, embracing the poor, the lonely, those who are suffering and facing injustices, by coming alongside them, visiting those in prison, those who have been falsely accused, those who are facing difficulties, challenges, feeding the hungry, clothing those who need clothes, etc. That's what God calls us as the church to do. And Jesus says, whatever you do for the least of these, you do for me. And so whatever it is we do as a church in faith for those sacrificially, we do it for him on his behalf.
Thank you for adding that, Sean. And there would be a thin line between a blessing and a prosperity. So most of the time we don't see in the lenses how Bible trying to show us. So the question is, what is the meaning of blessing? And according to Christian teachings, what does that mean to be blessed? And adding to it, how should Christians should understand and seek the blessings in their everyday lives?
So that's an interesting question to answer, because it's so against a worldly definition of blessing, right? To be blessed in the world means to have a lot of things. You're blessed with a good family, you're blessed, and this is completely against what we've just discussed with suffering and pain and sickness. So what is blessing? Is that to have no suffering, no pain, no sickness? So are those people who are facing sufferings blessed, or are they not? Well, a worldly definition of blessing would mean that those who are facing suffering and injustice are not blessed ones, right? So I think as Christians, blessing is not dependent on circumstances. It's an inner peace and an inner joy that is not dependent on circumstances. That would be a definition that I would, as I look at Scripture, the whole counsel of God, I would say true blessing, theological blessing, biblical definition of blessing, is inner peace and inner joy that is not dependent on circumstances. And when I look at the Garden of Eden and I look at Adam and Eve before the sin, that to me is a symbol of true blessing, an example of true blessing and the glory of God ultimately. That's why we exist, to be a blessing. And so the truest definition of blessing is the ability to be able to give everything away.
Clear definition and clear explanation that how we should see a blessing. Coming to that next question, why do most of the people struggle financially while others experience the prosperity? Of course, this might be their own mistake or their own way of managing things, but still, why it happens?
Well, if we come back to that scripture that says the earth is the Lord's, I think it's Psalm 24 verse 1, and everything in it. And we're to view ourselves as stewards of what belongs to God. And that when we remember nothing belongs to us, but it all belongs to God, and we're to be faithful stewards, we can think about the parable of the talents, where the master gave 5 talents to one, 2 talents to another, and 1 talent to another. And when he went away, the one with 5 talents and the one with 2 talents was immediately faithful to multiply those talents. And as believers, we want to be faithful with the talents, the resources that God has entrusted to us. And when he returns, we long for him to say, "Well done, good and faithful servant." We are good and faithful stewards, we will see multiplication. When we view the resources as not our own, but as God's for the blessing of others in a way of excellent stewardship, inviting others into that stewardship of God's resources. Sometimes when we have less resources, we are of the mindset that we need to hold on to the little that we have because we will go hungry. To respond in faith with the few resources we have, the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and trusting God to multiply these resources so that many can be fed, many can experience the miraculous wonder and working of God.
Amazing. So you have a great explanation for it.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Deepen. Thank you.
Let's jump into that another question. How can Christians balance their spiritual commitments with their social responsibilities?
Such a great question. And we can be in danger of separating our spiritual life from our social responsibilities or work life and then categorizing everything. But my recommendation would be that our faith is worked out and lived in every area of society. When we go shopping, let your faith be expressed by the choices you make, even when you go shopping and purchase groceries. Let your faith be outworked at the petrol station, at the garage, as you fill your vehicle with fuel. Use every opportunity that we have. And that's how I would recommend we live out our social lives, by staying close to God and allowing your faith to be outworked in every thought, every word, every action, the meditations of your heart. Let them overflow into every aspect of life. Don't separate your spiritual life from your social life or your business life or any or sport or whatever it is you're doing. Let your faith be outworked in every aspect of life. That's my recommendation in how we should live our lives in relation to everything that goes on.
We are 24/7 Christians. Not we don't we are the coat of spiritual and something social. We are that example in the society. Yes, that's absolutely true. That's amazing. Thank you for that explanation. Let's jump into that our final question. It's about your own journey of faith. Significant moment of your faith journey that which is deeply impacted you and which helped you to understand the God's love more and your purpose in this life. And
thank you, Dekar. It's a joy to share with you. And I think there are 3 sets of circumstances in my life that I will highlight quickly. The first one is I became type 1 diabetic age 11, which meant that I had to go on insulin. My pancreas stopped working after a common cold. And at age 11, this made me realize that I could no longer do all the things that I longed to do, or eat or drink the things that I enjoyed eating, and had to be controlled by insulin and by diet and by exercise. And something else had control, as it were, over my life. This made me realize that actually it is God who has control over my life. The next thing that happened was my stepfather, who was very close to us at the time, age 14. So that was age 11 diabetes. Age 14, my stepfather had come out of the hospital from a gallbladder operation, and he died of a massive heart attack in our home that morning. leaving our family without a father figure in the home, my mum devastated. And this circumstance, this situation drew me closer to God as my father. It helped me to know God truly as my father without a father in my home. Biological father had left when I was 2 years old. Stepfather came in age 6, died in our home age 14, and that changed our lives as a family. But it has helped us to know God as our Father in the midst of this challenge, death, sickness, death, and then the final one, probably having children, family in my life, realizing that God is a Father who loves us so much as his children. I would do anything for my children. And having children is the blessing of God that shows me the love of the Father for his children.
When you went through those kind of situations like kind of diabetes, and when the time situation you lost the father, so everyone's life, some situations make the people someone better or bitter. So have you especially have any encounters with God, like God spoke to you through some visions or dreams or through the Bibles, and how you are self-motivated at the time and kept your faith, and how it
Staying close to God through his word and through fellowship with others, the encouragement of friends who are believers, my pastor, church leader at the time, and other fellow believers, was really what maintained my faith. And I must say, more than that, the opportunities to serve and to be a blessing to others, rather than wallowing in grief or challenges or feeling sorry for myself or self-doubt, really the opportunities to be a blessing to and service of others, in seeing the privilege that God has given us, even with a weakness like diabetes, like a disability becomes an ability. It gives me greater compassion for God. Taught me compassion for others who are suffering or sick, unwell, and to be a blessing to them. So having an illness taught me more about loving and showing comfort to others who are not well. Having experienced the death of a loved one enabled me to show compassion and care and kindness to those who are. And God speaks to us through those moments, reassuring us through the truth of Scripture, our experiences through the lens of Scripture, not interpreting Scripture through the lens of our experience, helps us to know and see God more clearly.
These are the true things, that coming closer to the scriptures and the fellowship. In our hard times, sometimes we may not win the battle alone. We need that company of the warriors. We need that company of the scriptures. With that words, we can win that battle. And so amazing of faith, and also the level of knowledge you shared with us for all the questions is really inspiring. We inspired through your testimony, through your explanations. I truly believe that our viewers also get blessed and get their answers. At least some viewers could have been definitely got their answers for what they are looking for in a very natural way, and we are really blessed. And thank you so much, Sean, and God bless you and your entire family. Thanks for being a guest here.
Thank you, Dekar. What a privilege for me, and a huge blessing to you and all the listeners out there who have listened today. God bless you and thank you.
Thank you.